Welcome to the Next Level Income Show, where it's our goal to raise your income, your investments, and your life to the next level. I'm your host, Chris Larson. You can get a free copy of our book at nextlevelincome.com. Just click on the book link. I even send you a copy if you put your address in. You're not going to want to miss part 2 of today's show with Bob Burnett, where we dive even deeper into Bitcoin, Bitcoin mining, as well as what he's doing with his companies. Stay tuned. Today's show is sponsored by Money Insights and their investment optimizer strategy. In my book, I share how I use this same strategy starting over a decade ago to invest my money in 2 places at one time. This strategy has been used by the wealthiest for generations for estate planning, minimizing taxes, preserving wealth, and increasing stability for their investments. Now you can do the same thing. In addition, you can build a plan to build an emergency fund, pay for college, fund a business, plan for retirement, and ultimately optimize your total financial picture. To find out more information, check us out at the banking link at nextlevelincome.com. On today's show, we welcome back Bob Burnett. Bob Burnett is a technologist and entrepreneur with over 35 years of experience in technology-related companies. He spent 11 years at Gateway Incorporated in a variety of management positions, including Chief Technology Officer, Executive Vice President of Products, and Executive Vice President of International Markets. Since leaving Gateway in 2004, Bob has also founded or co-founded over 15 companies, mostly in the technology space. Among his most recent ventures are 2 companies focused on cryptocurrency. Hey, Bob, welcome back.
Thanks, Chris. Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. I'm a little jealous since you're down in Florida, although I think it's about the same temperature up here today, which is nice to get a little sun for a change. But I went back and I was actually listening to our first podcast, which I don't usually do, but I really enjoyed the conversation. And again, we don't often do two-part interviews, but we got into so much stuff. I really was excited to have you back for part 2 here.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. We finished part 1. We started talking about Bitcoin mining. And again, I'm in a process of learning about this. One of the things that's fascinating to me that you brought up in our first conversation is that the combined power of the Bitcoin network is more powerful than the computing power of, you mentioned the United States government, the Chinese government, Apple, Facebook, I forget all the different companies, but just a massive amount of computing power. And you mentioned how it's never been hacked. So if you would, let's start off by talking about how Satoshi set this network up to become stronger over time and ultimately become this organic, growing, impenetrable network.
Sure. Yeah, and just, to clarify on the statement about the power of the network, the Bitcoin mining network is comprised of computers that use what are called ASICs. That stands for Application Specific Integrated Circuit. And this circuit, these you could think of them as CPUs. They are designed to do one thing really well, which is run something called the SHA-256 hash algorithm. Nobody needs to care about that, but that's what they do. And so when I refer to having more computing power than anybody in the world, what I'm talking about is the ability to run the algorithm, which really secures the Bitcoin network. Now, what happens is if you want to be in the Bitcoin mining business, there's we'll talk about kind of a simple thing about the way it works. The Bitcoin works on roughly a 10-minute heartbeat. Every 10 minutes, the transactions of the world get bundled together and processed. And when they get processed, I'm going to oversimplify. Basically, the collective power of the mining network around the world mines that block, which is process and mine are basically mean the same thing. At the end of that block, as it finishes processing, when the block is complete, it gets sent to what are called the nodes. The nodes maintain the ledger. Okay, so the balance of accounts, you could think of the equivalent of how much money is in everybody's checking account, sits in the nodes, and the miners are processing the transactions which feed that. Now, the miners are doing all this work and they get rewarded, and the reward that they get for doing that is every 10 minutes, a little bit of Bitcoin gets released into the money supply. Okay, there's only ever going to be 20 million Bitcoin. There's 18.9 million now. And a little bit of that gets released. Right now it's 6.25 Bitcoin. And additionally, individual transactions within that block have the option of adding a fee. You can think of it as a way of buying your way into some priority. And those fees are also shared by the miners. Now, if you are a miner and you own 1% of the world's computing power, you will get 1% of the proceeds, averaged over a period of time. So essentially what happens is if you're in the mining business, you can essentially guarantee yourself that you're going to get paid 144 times a day. So there aren't many businesses like that, 24/7, 365 on this 10-minute heartbeat. There is an opportunity, and you're not fighting for customers. You're not to deal with tenants. You're not trying to do any of those sort of things. You have a very predictable engine. Now, the biggest variable over time is, well, how many other people are doing it? So as you guess, if the price of Bitcoin in dollars is going up, then more people want to participate. And so you would find that you own less of the network.
So it's like oil, because, you know, when oil prices jumped, you had fracking and other types of technologies that made sense at $100 a barrel. We're at $25 a barrel. They went offline.
Yeah. There's one difference though.
Okay.
And that's that the supply doesn't change. It's the only thing in the world. So if you compare it to oil or gold or, you know, something like that. And the word mining, by the way, pays homage to the gold mining industry, because a lot of the thought behind Bitcoin was, how can we make something even better than gold? It was, you know, kind of a belief that the era of the gold standard was the best time period economic, the fairest time period in the world. So how do we take that but make it better? And so, but in gold, so for instance, in gold, the average inflation rate of gold, meaning how much does supply increase every year, is about 2%. But if the price of gold goes up, obviously gold mining companies say, well, we're going to work overtime. We'll open up mines that maybe were less productive. They'll do sort of things like after they do that for a little while, what happens? The supply increases. As the supply increases, the price corrects back down, and vice versa, right? So if gold prices are greatly suppressed, they have to lay people off, shut down mines, and then eventually the gold supply reduces and the price, you know, so there's this natural balancing. Right. Bitcoin is a phenomenal thought exercise, because say, well, what if those things are happening, but the supply still comes? Because the 10 minutes doesn't change. The 6.25 Bitcoin that get released doesn't change. So that's a fascinating, if you multiply that out, by the way, 6.25 Bitcoin times 10 minutes segments of the day, there's 104 of those, you'll end up with 900. So right now, 900 new Bitcoin get minted every day, which there's only ever going to be 21 million. So what happens? Well, every 4 years approximately, there's what's called a halving, and that reward cuts in half, as you probably can guess. And you half 6.25 and you get 3.125, and then you half that and you half that. And you'll find a few decades down the road that there's not much left, right?
And when, just to review, Bob, what's the date that we're going to hit the end for the 21 million?
About 2140.
Yeah, 2140.
Yeah.
So
but
probably we probably won't be around. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that,
well, yeah,
you know, I might get close.
You got a better shot than I do, because you got a little more runway.
Statistically speaking.
but I guess you never know. But here's an interesting thing. So crude terms, the first 90% of all the Bitcoin came into circulation in the first decade. The next 9% comes into circulation in the second decade, which we are early stages of the second decade. And the last 1% comes in over the last century. So it's essentially at the end of this time period, then Bitcoin doesn't change.
Right.
Like the money. So we all know there's only ever going to be 21 million, but almost all that is in circulation by the end of this decade.
Right.
But remember, the fees are still there. So the miners are still incented to do their work.
So that's a question that I like to kind of pause and ask here. So, and this is something that I didn't quite understand at first. So the incentive today is for the Bitcoin reward, essentially. I was trying to explain this to my wife. That's when I always try to, if I can explain it to my wife, who's an architect, then I probably understand it. And then she was kind of like, well, what happens when the Bitcoin runs out? I said, well, there's fees.
Right.
So there's still a reward after.
Still a reward.
But it would, and we'll still call it mining at that point, you think?
Yes,
I guess it's 2140.
That still will be called mining. The same function occurs.
Yeah.
And here's the interesting thing about Bitcoin. So, interesting data point. I know we like data points for numbers people. So, in 2021, Bitcoin processed more value than either Visa or American Express. So you wonder if you want to put it into perspective, how big is Bitcoin now? That's how big it is. So, pretty big.
That's pretty solid.
Pretty big number.
Yeah. And I like your comparison because I've heard it called digital gold. And that's what, in my conversations with my friends and investors that are, novices, or don't really know about it. It's like, well, it's kind of like digital gold. And I like that term. And whoever designed it, Satoshi, whether it was an individual or a group, it's pure genius in my opinion when it looked.
Yeah, it really was, because I recently on LinkedIn got drawn into a little bit of a let's call it a friendly discourse with a gold bug. So a guy who believes that we are going to return to the gold standard, and IMF is going to drive this, and there'll be a gold-backed currency that runs the whole world. And there are a lot of people who hold a lot of gold believing that that's going to happen.
Sure.
And I guess it would be up to the public to decide who won the debate. But at the end of the day, I said, the problem is, Bitcoin is scarcer. We just talked about what it is.
Yeah.
It's easier to transport. By the way, you think about if you had $1 billion of gold.
I'm sorry, is that how much? $1 million?
$1 billion. Doesn't matter.
$1 billion.
$1 million, $1 billion. Doesn't
well,
matter.
I prefer $1 billion personally, but
okay. You have $1 billion in gold, and you're sitting there in North Carolina, and you need to move it to Albania, just for whatever reason.
Yeah, I'm thinking like illegal arms purchase in Albania or something like that.
Yeah.
But let's say I'm going to. Yeah, what's it cost to move it, right?
Yeah. So what's the cost to move it? What are the logistics and the difficulty of doing that?
So you have to guard it, have to move it, have to put it on a ship, move it across. It's it's in the probably 1% range is my guess.
Well, I would say that. I mean, we're just swagging it 1 to 2%.
Yeah.
With a lot of risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if the world knows you're moving, some guy in Albania finds out, hey, there's $1 billion of gold, and he might be waiting for you. There's all kinds of things, and that create. I'll come back to this in a second. I call that resistance. Okay. Now.
Yeah.
And by the way, how long does that take? How long does it take you to coordinate that? Several weeks, probably.
Yeah, that's reasonable. Sure.
Probably.
Yeah. So there's time, cost. Yeah.
So I can move $1 billion of Bitcoin to a guy in Albania, and it'll be done before this podcast.
Yeah.
And it'll be for no money. And he will know with 100% certainty at the end that it's valid. Because by the way, when you get the golds to the guy in Albania, He's now then got to hire somebody to authenticate it.
Oh yeah, and $1 billion, that's a lot to authenticate. And yeah,
Yeah.
if that concept, so if you just heard that and that concept's foreign to you, listen to part 1 of the interview, because Bob talks about, how that process works and how it's transacted in real time, and it's out there. It's not anonymous. It's anonymous, but it's public.
Yeah. And this, I think obviously your audience here is primarily money-oriented people. This is about money. But what I find, because I talk to a lot of people about money, is that very few people really think about money. What is it? They want it. They know that having it is a good thing, but they don't really know what it is. If you kind of, sometimes, we use this term first principle sometimes. Let's go back. So, what is money? Money is a representation primarily of work, and work is energy. So a monetary system is a system by which you move energy through space and time. And things like inflation and taxes and fees, those are resistance points. So if it moved like water through a pipe, right, then inflation and taxes and fees would be stealing some of the flow of that water in the pipe. And if what ends up, if you start with a gusher at the beginning and you have a trickle at the end, well, then there's a whole bunch of loss of energy down that pipe. And so Bitcoin is designed for that. And monetary systems, financial systems, what happened in Argentina 4 times, what happened to Rome, all those sorts of things, where they created too much resistance in their monetary system and it failed ultimately.
Yeah. And I think I love the way you say that. I was on a podcast late yesterday, and we were talking about, essentially what money represented. And I said it represents your life, like life force, like energy. And, it's a store. And we were talking about that. And, I was talking about it in the context of educating my children and how you have to have respect for money. And I think that is interesting. You can take your own energy, you can transfer that into and trade your time and life force for money. And then if we can take that same energy and transmit it to digital, to energy back into Bitcoin, it's very fluid if you think about it in that capacity.
And to move it through space and time. We just talked about moving it through space to Albania. If you want to move wealth to a grandchild that maybe in your case isn't even born yet, Bitcoin's already thought about that. Bitcoin, how does it do that with the least amount of resistance? I promise you, the fiat system, they've thought it all right, and they've thought about robbing you blind trying to do that.
I just finished up with our attorney going over our estate plan last week, and I'll tell you what, the government's thought about all the different pieces and chunks, and it's very inefficient to go from generation to generation. That's for sure. Yeah.
So, that, because I think, I mean, we were a little off where you wanted to go with this, Chris, but I think, understanding that Bitcoin, it's not like a stock. It's not like, it is a monetary system. It's a network, it's a protocol, and it is money. It's, and there's nothing like that. You can't think, well, okay, I understand real estate, or I understand equities, and Bitcoin's just like this, or like that. No, it's not that way. It's radically different.
I think that's what's really kind of intrigued me as I've gone through the process of learning about this, is exactly that. It's thought through in the fact of, it's a store of value. And so I guess that you said we weren't going where I wanted to go, but actually you went exactly where I wanted to go on this, Bob, because I wanted to talk about the concept, because there's a lot of people who are trading cryptocurrencies. I have conversations with friends and it comes up. They're like, oh, I'm trading this, this crypto and that one, and you should, look into this. I made 50% here. Whereas what I found in the Bitcoin community, it's a slightly different conversation. You do have traders out there, but the larger conversation that I found is that, It's people that are buying and accumulating Bitcoin, much like the gold bugs that you refer to, that would buy and accumulate gold. Or I know people, we give like silver coins or gold coins, as presents in the family. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how Bitcoin is different in that respect to other cryptocurrencies. And as an investor, in your opinion, like how would one think about this in terms of, a fit in their portfolio, again, in your opinion?
Sure. Okay. So there's Bitcoin, and then there's about 10,000 other cryptocurrencies. And there is, in my mind, a pretty radical distinction between them, even though they tend to get lumped together. So I even, in my terminology, when I say Bitcoin, I mean Bitcoin.
Right.
I don't mean anything else. And if I say crypto, I mean everything else, don't mean Bitcoin. So, to me, and I think that's a vernacular I wish everybody would adopt, but, and why is that? Okay. Bitcoin is not an experiment. Bitcoin has a very specific goal and objective. We've talked about, I think, in large part what that goal and objective is. It's proven to do what it says, that what its intended purpose is. It said that it could do that, and that is to fix money, to remove government control from money. And it is the only cryptocurrency, so it's the only one that is truly decentralized. So if you go out, people go out and they start looking at Ethereum and Polkadot and this one and that one, what you're going to read about almost every single one is that they claim to be decentralized. But what I would tell you is, now go see, well, what website are you on reading about this cryptocurrency? Is there a CEO of that company? Is there a centralized server that runs that cryptocurrency? Is there a committee or governance group that decides if the money supply expands and contracts? Well, those are all centralization things.
Like, let's take Facebook's is Lira. Is that right? Or I'm sorry, not Lira.
Well, Libra, they're kind
Libra,
of I think they're wandering
Libra.
aimlessly now,
but yeah, so we're calling it Libra. And I think that's a great example. There's someone controlling the process with that.
And it's my belief, and we could probably have a philosophical argument. I don't believe decentralization will ever occur with anything else. Now, that's not all bad. Not everything has to be decentralized. Some things are better centralized, but money, decentralized is the way to go. And if the network hadn't grown exactly the way that it did, if the protocol wasn't developed exactly the way that it did, if Satoshi Nakamoto had not disappeared and turned over the reins, which is a massively, Satoshi created it. I'm not sure how much we talked about this before. Satoshi has on the order of 900,000 Bitcoin. So about 4% of the supply is in a wallet with Satoshi. Never moved a single one, not a single one. Satoshi's never leveraged or taken advantage of what he did. And we will never know if he will or he won't, but I doubt he will. I think this is a person coming from a philosophical perspective of fixing what he believed to be the biggest problem in the world, which I believe is the biggest problem in the world, which is broken money.
We talked deep about that and the roots in war and the Fed and everything. Yeah.
Right. And I think he realized, one, the only way this works is to be decentralized. And the only way to be centralized is for him to disappear. And so a huge act on his part, because this is a guy, even at the time he walked away, that was already walking away from massive life-changing wealth. And he did that like 2 years, like 2012. He's, it's already worth tens of millions of dollars, and he walked from it. So anyway, back to your whole thing about cryptocurrency. So Bitcoin fixes money. I just stating my opinion, I don't believe any other cryptocurrency has a chance of being money. Now, are there other problems that these companies could solve? Yes. For instance, there's a cryptocurrency called Handshake, and the not endorsing it or anything, but I own a tiny amount of it, by the way, tiny amount. But the purpose of it is to wrest control of domain services from a central authority. Okay. And so we don't have time for it and probably bore the tears out of people, but basically a website like www.yahoo.com
right.
isn't really owned by Yahoo. It's kind of rented by Yahoo, and there are organizations that give them control, and in the right circumstances.
I hear you, because then we can start to get into like how Google shut the internet down for
and so it's Handshake is a project that I think has some technical merit that attempts to solve one of those problems. If you have the technical aptitude to go in, read the white papers, if they are solving a real problem in the world, which I would say that's one, they have the technical aptitude and the funding and all those sort of things to make it happen. Wonderful. In the old days, we would just call that investing in a startup, by the way. That's really what you're doing. So if you are somebody who's used to being an angel investor in technology firms, then investing in cryptocurrency might be right up your alley. If you're not, I would probably recommend that you stay away. And unless there is somebody you absolutely trust with that, because what you're basically doing is you're trying to figure out if you're trying to figure out what technology company out of a whole host of them is going to emerge and solve these problems.
Right. It's like with the internet revolution. You had you looked at the internet service providers. You look at which one of these technologies out of 100, then 10, then 5 is going to ultimately win, and it's tremendously asymmetric proposition, right?
Whether it's a music service provider or why did Amazon win and pets.com lose, or MySpace law. I mean, so if you want to take those kind of flyers, and I'm not telling you whether it's good or bad, but just know that if you another thing you can do is go look at, it's easy, Google, go look at like the top 10 currencies by year for the last decade. And what you'll see is every single year, number one by a monster is Bitcoin. 2 through 10, change every year. And if you go back 7 or 8 years, I'm not sure anything in the top 10 from 7 or 8 years ago is still in the top 10. So even 3 or 4 years, you're going to only get a couple. Like these things flame out at amazing rates, and the Shiba Inus and the I don't know, the Doge coins and all those that have the 1000x returns, and then they have the 800x correction back down, and they're just people gambling, frankly. That's and that bothers me. I think because those same people could take an investment in Bitcoin, and you asked about this too. So Bitcoin people don't look at it the same way. Most people in Bitcoin don't even look at it as buying Bitcoin. They look at it as selling dollars. What they are saying is, hey, I want to place a bet in an alternative monetary system in the future. So I'm going to take some of my wealth that's currently value in this fiat monetary system, the current financial establishment system, I'm going to move it into this new system. Over time, yes, I absolutely expect the exchange rate between the two systems, just like the exchange rate, if you travel to Japan, there's exchange rate to change. But I really don't want to then sell my Bitcoin and buy back dollars, because if I buy back dollars, what am I going to put it in that's better than where I just moved it? And now this is where people will probably think I'm crazy. I'm just gonna. I want to be really explicit that I'm giving my opinion. But as we sit here today, Bitcoin priced in dollars is just under $1,000. It peaked in the high 60s earlier this year. To me, that's completely irrelevant. Doesn't matter, because I believe at the end of the decade that Bitcoin will be priced as a 7-figure number in 2022 dollars. I can't even predict what it'll be in 2030 dollars, because I don't know what a dollar means in 2030.
Yeah. You asked a great question on the first episode. Like, what would it mean if, I was going to have $100 million, 10 years from now? Yeah, so many variables.
Yeah. And there's a bunch of reasons, why I say that. And one is, we talked a little about El Salvador, I think, but Bitcoin is now becoming the legal tender of countries. It is already in El Salvador. Go pull the headlines. There is legislation in place in Wyoming, Arizona, and Texas already for states to make it legal tender. I can tell you, without being specifically, that I have been consulted by 2 other states to help with them in trying to draft similar from politicians within those states to draft other legislation. So we may not see the government make it legal tender, but you may see there's this whole states' rights thing, which we don't want to go down our rabbit hole, but the states are starting to.
I do, but we don't have time.
Yeah.
Well,
states are starting to.
That's like part 4 of the series here, Bob. So
yeah. Okay. So what you see though is if that's happening, and El Salvador, there's a nice little story, is I worked some with them on their transition. So why is that important to El Salvador?
Yeah, let's talk about that. This is great.
So here's one. First, El Salvador, back in the 80s was a bad place. Civil war, it was a mess, and their currency failed in that time period. As they came out of that, they said, you know what? They made a smart move, which was, we're not even try. We're just going to go to a dollar-based economy. Okay, fine. Now, it turns out that El Salvador has a population of diaspora. Diaspora are citizens living overseas working. That's as large as the local population. There's about 6.5 million people there. Yeah, there's about 6 million, most of them in the United States. And those people have, over the last several decades, been more prosperous, of course, people in El Salvador, and they send money back. That money that goes back represents 25% of the GDP of the whole country. It's a phenomenal number.
That's incredible.
So one of every $4 in their economy came because somebody here did some work and they moved it. Now, they had 2 things going on. Okay, they're a poor country. They're working their way out of debt. The IMF has been brutal to them. Again, rabbit hole we probably don't have time for, but just say the International Monetary Fund is set up to typically help second and third world countries finance their debt and help bring them out. The history of the IMF is like 7 years old now. Not a single country they've helped has ever gotten out from under them, though. It's
not a great track record.
It's a horrible track record. And what they do is they just they lock them into these loans and they can never get out. And so El Salvador said, screw that. We got to get away from that, number one. Number two, we do hold a lot of dollars in our treasury. And the US is over here. They have billions of dollars in their treasury. The US is over here and they're printing money. And, they're dropping helicopter money to people in the US and they're fighting COVID and they're doing this. Well, how much of that helps El Salvador? None.
Hurts them. Yeah.
But the inflation that results from the printing of the money kills their treasury. So, if they're sitting on $1 billion and we're sitting at inflation at 14%, which is the real number, that means they're losing $140 million a year sitting on cash, right? So they need to go away from that. Second reason. Third reason, we'll go back to the diaspora. 25% of the GDP is being sent into the country. It came into the country through one of two mechanisms, bank wires or Western Union. Most of it through Western Union, and most of it $200, $300 at a time. The people in El Salvador at the back end of those transactions were, in the best case, getting 90% of the money. In other words, if I had family members and I sent them 500, they're getting 450. Yeah. And Western Union is taking all this money. Additionally, the Western Union offices, more people were robbed outside of the Western Union offices than anything else. Because
oh wow, well that makes good. Was it Bonnie?
Where's the money? Right?
Who said where's the money? No. Who's that? Who said that?
Oh, the bank robber.
Yeah.
Famous quote from the bank robber. So why do you
rob banks? That's where the money is.
That's where the money is. Yeah. So they were doing that. So they made the switch to Bitcoin. One, to say, screw you to the IMF. Two, to stop the melting iceberg of their treasury. Yeah. And three, if they think about this, 10% of the money that got sent overseas was absorbed by Western Union. 10% of 25% is 2.5%. If they could cut Western Union out, the GDP of an entire country lifts by 2.5%. That's a big number.
Yeah.
That's a big number. That's more growth in GDP than like we in our economy. And kudos to Chris who identified the robber we were trying. It was Willie Sutton.
I have to for the audience. Somebody's out there saying it's Willie Sutton. So coming through the universe.
Yeah.
No, it's phenomenal. And I know you had a part as you went through that. Or helped them go through that process, Bob, and just the economic opportunities for the citizens, the country as a whole. And then if you multiply that, across the world, I think as Americans, we're a lot of times insulated, from these issues.
Yeah, we are. And it's hard. A lot of times when I speak, one of the first things I'll do, you and I have done this, so you might remember, but I'll say, what country do you think has the highest usage of cryptocurrency? And the answer is Nigeria right now. Yeah. I'm sure in the next survey it'll be El Salvador, but previously it was Nigeria, and other countries at the top of the list are countries like Turkey, Vietnam, the Philippines, places like that. Well, what's the common denominator of those countries? You have countries that are relatively poor, relatively unstable politically, relatively unstable economically. And so these people go, hey, I can't have faith in the traditional system. I'm jumping on board here. And people here, probably even a lot of the people listening to your podcast, they probably have some level of affluence. The system, they've done okay in the current system. Now, they may have been robbed blind by the system, but they still did okay. So I think that's the question is, would you have done better? Yeah. But the other thing is there's a whole other people who didn't even get a chance to play, because there's a couple billion people in the world who can't even get a bank account.
Yeah. And that's the, That's the thing that's so powerful. If you look at Bitcoin, if you look at it as an opportunity to trade, if you look at it like digital gold, as we've been talking about, but then you look at it as more than that, of a stabilizer, as an opportunity for countries and the individuals in those countries to relieve some of this unrest and open up economic doors that we take for granted in the United States. I think that's what's really, really fascinating to me, Bob. I know this is really important to you and what you're doing. I'd love for you to share again a little bit more before we wrap up about Barefoot Mining, what your company is doing to participate in this, and the best way for people to keep up with you as as you share information, articles.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so my main thrust is through a company called Barefoot Mining. You can find us at barefootmining.com. What we do is we like to develop small to medium-sized mining sites. We especially like to do it with what I call stranded energy, which would be some sort of renewable, typically hydro, wind, solar, natural gas, things like that, and go directly to the source of the power and put a Bitcoin mining facility right adjacent to wherever the power source is. We do things in traditional ways as well, just plugging computers into the wall essentially. But regardless, our emphasis is on small and medium sized. We do frequently work with investors. So as we're bringing a new site up, one of the things that may shock people is that the traditional banking industry doesn't like my company or my industry very much. So we generally don't get a lot of cooperation from them when we make loans. We traditionally bring in investors to work with us, to do that. We just, as Chris knows, we closed a round on a new site about a month ago, and we're working on a couple more that will become available here shortly. So those of you who may have interest in that, feel free to reach out to us through the website. I can also be reached on Twitter at boomer_BTC, and that there's some significance to that name, because I think the Bit community kind of looks traditionally at the older folks, including the boomers like me, as the people that ruined the system, that ruined it for them. And so I use that name. I get some jabs of it, but I'm trying to let the younger generations know that I get it, that some of those who are a little more seasoned get it, and we're fighting, for them. And I'm fighting for my kids. I'm fighting for my grandkids, fighting for people in other areas of the world. And so, we've had a really good run financially. Those of us in the mining industry have had a really good 4 or 5 year run. I believe it'll continue to be good for several years, maybe even decades ahead. And so we've done well financially, but I also think we're working and providing stability and infrastructure to something that fixes what I believe is the biggest problem in the world too. So if you decide to get involved, whether that's with us or independently, or, there's a lot of different ways to invest in mining and Bitcoin, you're doing more than just looking at numbers on a spreadsheet and some sort of return on your investment. You're doing something much bigger.
Yeah. No, and for that reason, Bob, for the reasons you're doing it, your door's always open to come back on the show. And we certainly hope you do. It's been a pleasure expanding this conversation again for part 2. And so barefootmining.com, we're going to have that in the show notes, along with all the other information to get a hold of Bob. Again, if you haven't yet, go back, listen to part 1 with Bob Burnett, string them back to back together. You're going to learn a tremendous amount about Bitcoin today. Bob, thanks again for being with us.
Thank you, Chris.
Hey, Chris here again. I hope you found this episode valuable. Now, I have one more thing to gift you. We have a page for my coaching clients where you can get a free copy of my book, as well as much more from previous guests on the show. Just check out nextlevelincome.com/coaching to get a free copy of my book, audiobook, and much more. I'll send you a copy of my book and cover all the shipping costs as a thank you for listening to the podcast. Also, please like, share, and take just 90 seconds to give us a rating on Apple Podcasts.